to do with Guantanamo Bay, which Cuba wants back. I want to give you, just kind of close with a little flavor of what it's like in Washington and my impressions of what it was like in Cuba. There's a lot of pent-up energy in Washington for a change in policy. And for the past 8 years, they've been going in the wrong direction, according to people who want policy change. American businesses, NGOs, the punditocracy in D.C., everyone's very excited about what may happen with Cuban policy. It's the first time in years where you have, where there actually might be some change. And so there are a number of reports that have come out. Council on Foreign Relations, Brookings Institution did 2 reports, one this year, one last year. The Cuban Study Group is a group of Cuban Americans that favor policy change. They came out with something earlier this year. This excitement extends to the business community. But my council's member companies are increasingly interested in Cuba. I think they see it a new market. It's kind of one of the last protected markets out there. And a lot of pent-up demand for consumer products. And sister organizations of ours, like the Chamber of Commerce, are getting increasingly engaged in advocating for policy change. Now, finally, Cuba. I'm not an expert on Cuba policy. I pay much more attention to the U.S. policy. But I had the chance to visit Cuba in 2007, and a number of my colleagues visit Cuba frequently. On a personal level, Cuba's fascinating. I mean, it's a real interesting place, and it's permit a couple of sweeping generalizations. The Cubans that I met have a great warmth towards Americans, want to talk about baseball. Almost everyone is a family member, relative, or friend in the United States. They didn't want to talk politics, they want to talk about what we have in common. Cubans are forced to be very entrepreneurial and have to live in make the best of very difficult circumstances. Many have access to foreign currency, either because they work in the tourism industry or because they have a relative or friend or someone who lives in the United States or abroad. Economically, Cuba functions, but not well. It's very much an old school statist economy. An ambassador friend of mine calls it Cuban Inc. Everything goes through one plate, goes through the central government. It's certainly not U.S. capitalism, which is no surprise. But it's also not Chinese communism. It's more old school Soviet style. And as an American, I mean, it's strange to walk around and see how little of a consumer culture there is there. There are very few shops, virtually no Western branded clothing. There's some Chinese sneakers here and there, and a couple of American knockoffs. And there's not a Starbucks or a Caribou or anything like that on every corner. In fact, there's no consumer branded stores in Cuba. There used to be Benetton, and that closed last year. And so there's really nothing. There's some local shops, and that's about it. In terms of the more general economy, Cuba's diversified away from sugar, which it used to be overly reliant on. Tourism and mining now account for a greater share of the economic output than in the past. But it's weighed down by inefficient state enterprises and a dual currency that severely disadvantages Cuban citizens. Cuba is also recovering from a series of hurricanes that, depending on estimates, inflicted 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 billion worth of damage on the Cuban economy. My economic takeaway from Cuba is that the government wants Cuba to be self-sufficient. This is a lesson of their over-reliance on the Soviet Union and what happened after the Soviet Union collapsed. The problem is they're now totally relying on the Venezuelans, though I think they recognize that and are trying to take steps to make that less so. Cuba attempts to rely on foreigners only for things that it can't do itself. Politically, Fidel is no longer in power, but he's still a force to be reckoned with. He's certainly not left the scene, and he occasionally comes out with these reflexiones, which are largely seen as impediment. His presence is largely seen as an impediment to any real reform in Cuba. Raul Castro is gingerly moving to implement some economic reforms, particularly with respect to the agricultural sector, and he recently reshuffled his ministry, his cabinet. He got rid of one prominent reformer, or shuffled one prominent reformer, Carlos Laje, as well as one prominent Fidelista, Felipe Perez Roque. It's too early to really get a sense of what these reforms and reshufflings might mean. I mean, to me, it signifies Raul trying to get a better grip and handle, more control over the Cuban bureaucracy and the Cuban government. Now, my political takeaway is that stability is the key to the Cuban government. Given that, it's an open question as to whether the Cuban government may receive warmly, large gestures by the United States. If we were to open up all travel to Cuba, and we were to have, the estimated 500,000 to 1 million travelers that studies say would go down to Cuba absent U.S. restrictions, would the Cubans welcome us? I'm not sure. So, to conclude, part of the problem with U.S.-Cuba relations is that many of the same players have been around for so long. I mean, well, Fidel Castro is no longer in power. He's still around in the background. And the guy that's currently in charge also has a last name of Castro. And much of Raúl Castro's inner circle are the same people that came to power with Raúl and Fidel 50 years ago. Similarly, in the United States, Cuban policy is personal for a number of members of Congress in particular. It's in some ways a family affair. Time eventually heals all wounds, but I don't think we're at the point yet where we can treat Cuba as just another country in the foreign policy bureaucracy, which means that I think while we're on the right track, the trajectory is good, it's towards better relations. I think it's going to be a while before we get to a place where the U.S.-Cuban relationship is anything that resembles a normal relationship. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you for the nice talk. A couple questions real quick. First of all, if the United States under President Obama reestablishes full relations with Cuba, what in your professional judgment or opinion will be done for those Cuban Americans who are still alive that were enemies of the state 50 years ago when they left Cuba as an enemy of Castro, and their land having been confiscated, their homes having been confiscated? In other words, I'm talking about the question of Cuban Americans just to reestablish these ties and smooth everything out because we're richer.
That's one of the thorny issues that's going to need to get resolved before we have normal relations with Cuba. I mean, that's the big issue that's out there. It's not the first time that it's happened though, and we go through tribunals and other ways of resolving these reparations issues. We've done it with the Soviet Union, we've done it with Nicaragua, we've done it with Iran. And so this gets worked out on a government-to-government level. I guess a couple things. The polls suggest that most Cuban Americans in the United States don't want to go back. And so at least the issue is money. It's not wanting to go back and take the Cubans' land. Money is fixable. You can handle that. You can have some sort of, there have been a number of proposals out there. Someone that I know in Washington has proposed agreeing to some sort of an airline tax that would be put into a pot that would fund reparations payments. I think there are ways of getting around it. And as one former British ambassador told me at some point, that's the least of your concerns. It'll get worked out. It always does. If you want better relations, if both sides want better relations, then they'll work in good faith towards a resolution of the issue. I think there are ways to do it.
Thank you.
So you mentioned earlier that your organization measures the impact of the unilateral trade sanctions with Cuba. I was just wondering what metrics you use to establish these impacts, and have you ever kind of done any study on the impacts of these unilateral trade sanctions on social infrastructure and such, and what the impact would be if you remove them?
We don't actually measure the economically the impact. We generally rely on others to do this. I mean, the U.S. International Trade Commission does this, and they do that. They go around and they collect economic data from a number of different sources in D.C. and elsewhere in Cuba. They come around and visit people like us that work on the policy aspects. I mean, we educate and advocate.